Dentists tell you not to pick your teeth with any sharp metal object. Then you sit in their chair.
I love when white dudes get mad and cuss, right? Because y'all some funny you cuss.
I've been a big fan of Bill Cosby all my life. Never met the man before, but he called me up about a year ago and chastised me on the phone for being too dirty on stage. I was pissed off. I was so mad, I called Richard Pryor's house up and said, yo, Richard, Bill Cosby just called me up and told me I was too dirty. And Richard said, the next time motherfucker call, tell him I said, suck my
Bill Cosby ruined Richard Pryor's career, and he did it while the world was laughing.
I was canceled, and that's bullshit. Motherfuckers didn't cancel me.
On the surface, they were two of the greatest comedians in history. But behind the scenes, one was fighting for truth, the other was fighting to stay on top. Richard Pryor gave us raw honesty, unfiltered rage, and genius wrapped in pain. Bill Cosby gave us respectability, clean jokes, and a TV dad persona built on lies.
Hickory dickory dock.
Hickory dickory dock.
I don't know who broke the clock.
But what the public didn't know, at least not back then, is that their feud wasn't just about comedy. It was about control. And it got personal, really personal. Because long before Cosby was accused of being a predator by dozens of women, Richard Pryor already knew who he was, and he tried to warn us. In the 1970s, Richard Pryor and Bill Cosby were both at the top of their game, but they couldn't have been more different. Cosby had already made history with his starring role on I Spy, becoming the first black man to lead a primetime network drama. He had Grammy Awards, best-selling comedy albums, and a carefully maintained image as America's clean comedian. He was articulate, respectable, and knew exactly how to win over white audiences. By the time Fat Albert aired in 1972, Cosby had built an empire around wholesomeness. Richard Pryor, on the other hand, came from chaos and made no effort to hide it. He was raised in a brothel, traumatized by the violence and dysfunction of his upbringing. But instead of pretending to be something he wasn't, Pryor brought that pain to the stage. He transformed it into sharp, cutting comedy that was fearless, political, and often vulgar. He talked about race, addiction, police brutality, subjects Cosby wouldn't touch.
And we lived in I guess you call it a brothel. We called it a whorehouse.
What made Pryor revolutionary also made him a threat to Cosby. Because while Cosby was polishing the image of black excellence to fit mainstream media standards, Pryor was tearing that illusion down. His truth was messy, angry, real, and it resonated. Cosby didn't like that. In interviews, Cosby made thinly veiled criticisms of Pryor's style, claiming vulgarity wasn't necessary for good comedy. He called Pryor irresponsible, claiming that black entertainers had a duty to represent their people with dignity. But what he really meant was, Pryor was ruining the carefully negotiated image Cosby had built with white gatekeepers. What made it worse? Cosby didn't just criticize Pryor from a distance. Behind the scenes, he actively tried to shut him down. According to those close to Pryor, Cosby would call promoters, label executives, even network producers, urging them not to work with Pryor because of his inappropriate content. He warned that associating with Pryor could damage careers. Pryor didn't have the same connections or corporate polish to fight back. And yet, even with the pressure, Richard refused to clean up his act.
I was pissed off. I was so mad, I called Richard Pryor's house up and said, yo, Richard, Bill Cosby just called me up and told me I was too dirty. And Richard said, the next time motherfucker call, tell him I said, suck my
The more Cosby tried to distance himself from Pryor, the more obvious it became. Cosby wasn't just protecting his brand. He was protecting his spot at the top. And Pryor was coming for it, whether Cosby liked it or not. By the early 1970s, Richard Pryor had fully broken away from his early Cosby-like style. He stopped trying to be safe, stopped trying to be palatable. And that's exactly when things started to take off. His stand-up sets were raw, political, and unpredictable. In 1974, his That Ends Crazy album would go on to win a Grammy. But even before that, the industry started paying attention. Not because they approved, but because they couldn't ignore him anymore. Pryor was filling clubs, selling out shows, and doing it his way. But Cosby was watching closely. According to insiders, Cosby didn't just disapprove, he actively saw Pryor's rise as a threat to the image he'd spent years crafting. It wasn't just about the cursing, it was about control. The clash reached a boiling point in Las Vegas. Pryor was booked to perform at the Aladdin Hotel, a big deal for a black comedian at the time. But the moment he arrived, something felt off. The room was filled with wealthy, mostly white patrons expecting a safe night of entertainment. What they got instead was unfiltered Pryor. Dark jokes, racial commentary, profanity, and a brutal honesty that had no place in the polished world of casino shows. Some walked out, others complained, but Pryor didn't flinch. What happened next, though, caught even him off guard. Behind the scenes, Cosby reportedly contacted the venue and chastised them for booking Pryor at all. He warned them that Pryor's act would ruin their brand and possibly his own. This wasn't just quiet disapproval anymore. It was sabotage. Shortly after that show, Pryor's Vegas opportunities began drying up. He wasn't formally blacklisted, but the message was clear. If you booked Pryor, you were stepping into a political minefield. It didn't stop him. In fact, Pryor leaned in harder. He went on to release Is It Something I Said, Bicentennial N, and Live in Concert, all brutally honest, wildly successful, and completely outside of Cosby's carefully controlled world.
I love when white dudes get mad and cuss, right? Because y'all some funny you cuss.
Cosby may have been on TV, but Pryor was changing the culture, and that terrified Cosby more than anything. By the mid-1970s, Richard Pryor had become undeniable. His stand-up albums were platinum. His Live on the Sunset Strip performances were being called revolutionary.
And you see a lion in the jungle, that's what they look like, lions. Motherfucker be in the bush, dummy. Yeah, get your ass out the car.
But what Cosby feared most was starting to happen. Hollywood wanted in. Pryor wasn't just a club comic anymore. Studios were offering roles, producers were calling. But not everyone was excited about this transition, including Bill Cosby. Sources close to both comedians have long alleged that Cosby tried to keep Pryor off major studio sets. In some cases, Cosby reportedly used his reputation as a gatekeeper to quietly suggest that Pryor wasn't a team player, that he was too unpredictable, too vulgar, too risky. The difference between the two men was stark. Cosby had been a network darling since I Spy, and he knew how to move in those rooms. Pryor was blunt, deeply mistrustful of executives, and refused to conform. Hollywood loved Cosby's polish. Pryor's chaos? Not so much. And yet, some saw the genius. When Pryor co-wrote Blazing Saddles with Mel Brooks, it was clear he had a voice far beyond the stage. He had insight, range, vision, but Warner Brothers wouldn't let him star in the film. The official reason? Insurance concerns. The real reason? They were afraid of his reputation. It didn't help that Cosby's silent disapproval cast a long shadow. Despite the pushback, Pryor kept going. Car Wash, Greased Lightning, Blue Collar. He delivered electric performances, showing that he wasn't just funny. He was layered, dramatic, brilliant. Eventually, his raw magnetism broke through the gatekeeping. In 1978, he starred alongside Gene Wilder in Silver Streak, and their chemistry was instant. It was the kind of crossover hit that Cosby couldn't touch. Comedy that didn't require watering down Pryor's edge. The movie was a hit, and Pryor was now a bona fide box office star. That same year, Cosby released California Suite, a film that underperformed. For the first time, it felt like the roles were reversing. Pryor's success wasn't just financial, it was cultural. He had become the face of a new kind of black excellence, one that didn't cater to respectability, one that didn't need a stamp of approval from Cosby or anyone else. Cosby couldn't stop it. The man he tried to shut down was now shaping the very industry that once rejected him, and no amount of phone calls could change that. By the late 70s, the tension between Richard Pryor and Bill Cosby wasn't just something whispered in backrooms. It was boiling into the public eye. Richard had had enough. Cosby's silent sabotage, the self-righteous interviews, the private calls to executives, Pryor saw through all of it, and he decided to speak up, but not in a press release, not through a manager. He did what he did best. He put it in the act.
I love Bill Cosby's show. I've been a big fan of Bill Cosby all my life. Never met the man before, but he called me up about a year ago and chastised me on the phone for being too dirty on stage. And I was pissed off. I was so mad, I called Richard Pryor's house up and said, "Yo, Richard, Bill Cosby just called me up and told me I was too dirty." And Richard said, "The next time motherfucker call, tell him I said suck my d."
Audiences laughed, but the industry didn't. Cosby had spent over a decade cultivating an image as the moral compass of black comedy. So when Pryor began making him the butt of the joke, the cracks in Cosby's public persona started to show. Pryor wasn't just swearing on stage, he was calling out hypocrisy, challenging the idea that success had to come at the cost of authenticity. Cosby, predictably, did not take it well. Behind the scenes, industry insiders say Cosby was livid. He allegedly redoubled his efforts to freeze Pryor out, warning studio execs, shaming fellow black entertainers for associating with him, and positioning himself as the safe alternative. He pushed the narrative that Pryor was unstable, unpredictable, and a bad influence, especially on younger black comics. But Pryor didn't care. In fact, he doubled down. He started using his platform to expose not just Cosby's ego, but the entire system that rewarded silence and punished truth. In one legendary moment during an interview, Pryor reportedly said, "Cosby's been kissing white folks' asses so long, he forgot what his own people sound like." It was harsh, but Pryor's audience, many of them working class, black, and fed up with respectability politics, understood exactly what he meant. It wasn't just about Cosby, it was about the message Cosby represented, that to be successful, black artists had to soften their truth, make themselves palatable, and never upset the powers that be. Pryor refused, but it came with a cost. While Cosby was landing family shows, endorsement deals, and university lectures, Pryor was still being treated as a liability. Studios were nervous about insuring him. Talk shows would hesitate to book him live. Magazines ran articles calling him difficult, reckless, even dangerous. Cosby, meanwhile, kept his hands clean, at least in public. But those who worked closely with both men knew what was happening. In the words of one former producer, Bill never forgave Richard for being more talented and more honest. That combination scared him. And even as Pryor's star continued to rise, the shadow of Cosby's influence followed him. He couldn't escape it. There were always closed doors, always meetings he wasn't invited to, always a sense that someone powerful didn't want him to win too much. But Pryor kept moving forward, because at the end of the day, he didn't want Cosby's life. He didn't want to be clean, safe, or scripted. He wanted to be free. And in telling the truth, even when it cost him everything, Richard Pryor did something Cosby never could. He earned respect without asking for permission. By the early 1980s, Richard Pryor had already achieved everything the industry said he couldn't. He had sold out theaters, starred in films, won Grammys, and rewritten the rules of stand-up comedy. But behind the curtain, his body and mind were breaking. The pressure of fame, the drug abuse, the unresolved trauma, everything was spiraling. And on June 9th, 1980, it all came to a head. Richard Pryor set himself on fire while freebasing cocaine and ran down the street in a full blaze. He was burned over more than 50% of his body and barely survived. The media ran with the story, calling it a drug accident, but Pryor later told the truth. He had done it on purpose.
Hell. If there's a hell, I've been there. There is a hell. And the devil turned out to be me.
That moment became a turning point, not just in Pryor's life, but in how the public began to view him. For some, it confirmed the stereotype that Pryor was unstable, self-destructive, dangerous. But for others, it revealed something much deeper. He was human, wounded, honest to a fault. And in that honesty, there was an undeniable brilliance. While Pryor was recovering, both physically and emotionally, Bill Cosby's career was reaching its peak. In 1984, The Cosby Show debuted on NBC. It was an instant success, portraying an upper-middle-class black family with education, humor, and warmth. Cosby played Dr. Heathcliff Huxtable, the lovable, sweater-wearing patriarch who became America's favorite dad. And with each passing year, Cosby positioned himself as not just a comedian, but a moral leader. He gave commencement speeches, wrote books on fatherhood, donated to universities, all while continuing to shame black entertainers who didn't meet his standard of decency. Even while Pryor battled addiction, multiple sclerosis, and depression, Cosby continued to portray himself as the better example. He used his influence to encourage executives and cultural leaders to reward respectable artists and avoid those who were too raw or undignified. Cosby didn't just want to be on top, he wanted to rewrite the entire definition of what black success looked like. And Richard Pryor, with all his honesty and chaos, didn't fit the mold. But something Cosby didn't account for was time. As the years went on, audiences started to notice something strange. The man who made them laugh about pain, Pryor, felt more trustworthy than the man who told them to avoid it, Cosby. Because Pryor never pretended.
I didn't know what I was getting into. That's how I feel. Had I known what I was getting into, I wouldn't have it. I wouldn't have this company.
Cosby, on the other hand, had a growing list of secrets. Whispers began circulating in Hollywood long before the headlines ever hit. Quiet settlements, silenced accusations, and behind closed doors, women who had been harmed were starting to speak. In 2005, just months before Pryor passed away, Andrea Constand filed a civil suit against Cosby, accusing him of drugging and sexually assaulting her. The public was shocked, but to those who'd worked behind the scenes, it wasn't new. Over the next decade, more than 60 women would come forward, alleging similar patterns of abuse, stories involving spiked drinks, coercion, manipulation, and rape. Suddenly, the entire narrative began to collapse. The same man who had spent years criticizing Pryor for being filthy was now accused of being a serial predator. The contrast was too much to ignore. Cosby had sold the world a lie, and it had profited him for decades. Pryor, meanwhile, had told the truth, even when it cost him everything. After Pryor's death in December 2005, many assumed his legacy would fade behind Cosby's towering reputation. But the opposite happened. As Cosby's scandals grew and his public image crumbled, Pryor's honesty came back into focus. People rewatched his specials, read his interviews, and suddenly, those old jabs at Cosby weren't just jokes, they were warnings. He knew. He saw the rot under the clean image, and he tried to tell us. What Pryor lacked in polish, he made up for in transparency. He talked openly about his addictions, his failings, his guilt. He didn't sugarcoat it. And somehow, that made him relatable, legendary, real. Cosby's empire, on the other hand, was built on denial. His entire brand depended on being untouchable. But once the allegations became undeniable, the fall was swift. In 2018, Cosby was convicted of SA and sentenced to prison. Though the conviction was later overturned on a technicality, his legacy was ruined. He went from being the most beloved TV dad to one of the most disgraced men in entertainment history. And maybe that's the real story here. For years, the industry and the public chose Cosby, chose the clean image, the safe laughs, the manufactured perfection, and they treated Pryor like a cautionary tale. But in the end, Pryor's imperfections made him unforgettable, while Cosby's perfection turned out to be a lie. Today, Richard Pryor is remembered as a pioneer, the voice that reshaped comedy, the man who bled on stage so others could speak freely. And Cosby? He's remembered not for what he gave us, but for what he took. Pryor lived in truth. Cosby lived in fear of it. And when the curtain finally fell, only one of them was still standing in the light. Today, most top comedians name Richard Pryor as their biggest influence. It's not just about his jokes, it's about the way he used comedy to tell the truth. Dave Chappelle once explained that Pryor invented the kind of comedy that makes people laugh and feel uncomfortable at the same time. Chris Rock called him the Rosa Parks of comedy, and even Kevin Hart, known for his clean image, credited Pryor for laying the foundation for all of them. Pryor earned that reputation by going places other comics wouldn't. He talked openly about racism, drug addiction, poverty, and mental illness. He shared deeply personal experiences and turned them into material, even when it made people uncomfortable. For black comedians in particular, Pryor showed it was possible to succeed without pretending to be something you weren't. Bill Cosby also influenced generations of comedians, but his approach was completely different. Rather than helping the next wave of performers, Cosby often criticized them. In the 1990s, as stars like Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy gained popularity, Cosby publicly accused them of being too vulgar. Murphy later revealed that Cosby even called him directly to complain about his language. Murphy said that after the call, Richard Pryor told him to tell Cosby, "Have a Coke and a smile and shut the F up." Cosby continued that pattern for years. He frequently attacked shows like Def Comedy Jam, calling them offensive and declining opportunities to support them. His public image was that of a moral leader, someone who stood for clean comedy, family values, and black excellence. But that image would later fall apart completely. In 2014, comedian Hannibal Buress performed a stand-up set where he referred to Cosby as a rapist with dozens of accusers. The clip went viral and sparked a media storm. That single moment forced the public to re-examine everything Cosby had built: his lectures, his TV legacy, and his personal claims of integrity. Women began coming forward in large numbers. Eventually, more than 60 women accused Cosby of SA, with patterns involving drugs and manipulation. In 2018, Cosby was convicted of sexually assaulting Andrea Constand and sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. Although his conviction was overturned in 2021 due to a prior legal agreement, the damage to his legacy was permanent. Temple University cut ties with him. NBC dropped plans for any revival of The Cosby Show, and several honorary degrees were revoked. Even his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame was defaced. In contrast, Richard Pryor, who died in 2005 after battling multiple sclerosis, was finally getting the recognition he deserved. In 2015, the Smithsonian honored him with a permanent exhibit. The Grammy Museum followed with a showcase of his career and personal artifacts. His raw stand-up clips resurfaced online, and younger generations began discovering how fearless and honest his work had been. While Cosby's empire collapsed under the weight of his lies, Pryor's truth kept rising. The industry chose Cosby for decades, but in the long run, it was Pryor's honesty that stood the test of time. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.